Okay, we're recording here. I'm so excited to have all of these beautiful women with me. Um, it feels so good just to have these amazing women in my orbit, and for me just to have these conversations and to share these amazing women with my world, and for me to be able to connect with them in a different way as well. So thank you for being here, Carissa. It's so
My
lovely to have
pleasure.
you.
Thank
And so
you.
for you, as someone, you are someone to me who lives the beauty way, and that's my friends that I reached out to. Is so many of us have been living this way for years, and we're offering the opportunity for people to see the light and receive the light and to live more of that beauty way. And so we do that in our lives and in our businesses. And really, our intention is to make the world a more beautiful place. So I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, why did you create a business in the way that you did?
Thanks, babe. Thank you for the introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you. And I feel really honored that I was one of the people that you asked, particularly with that being the background of who you asked and why. I I've created a lifestyle where I get to do what I love and get paid for it and have the ultimate kind of time freedom and kind of leisure time to the best of my ability at this particular moment. And the reason that I created it in that way was because I had I guess, a dream at one point in time that I would have no one to answer to, and that I would have my own autonomy with what I created, and that the roles and the responsibilities of my everyday life were really self-led. And I really wanted to um, just be in the joy of what I love to do every single day. And so I've created it in a way that enables me to have full flexibility, full capability and capacity to go out in the jet ski in the middle of the week or to go on adventures and travel and be able to do my work from wherever I am. That was like really the initial desire. Was I was a real traveler. I am a real traveler. And the idea of being stuck uh, to a location felt really limiting. And so I wanted to do something really different. And so took me a few years to build it to a point where I could really travel and do what I love.
Mhm.
And now it feels like I'm really living that desired reality.
So when you say a few years, do you feel like, as well as obviously having the money and the resources to be able to do that, do you feel though, you spoke about not having somebody to answer to. Do you feel that that is a big mindset shift that takes time in our 3D world as well?
Yeah, 100%. Like just before you even got to the sort of crux of that question, I was thinking like, the reason it took a few years was the first couple were getting out of the habitual ways of what work looks like.
Mm.
And, I remember for particularly the first probably year and a half, I would sit at my desk like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, in a really typical kind of way. Even if I didn't have, like, I would find something to work on, and I would sit there and I would be like, yeah, I'm working on my business. And I would I would be kind of whipping myself into working in that way. And so it was really interesting because even now, as I like reflect on the question even deeper, it's like I was answering to a version of myself that was still in that 3D reality. It
Yeah.
expected me to create in a particular type of a way, or just was so habitually trained to work in that structured setting.
Mm.
And for the first kind of year and a half, it really took some unwinding to
Mm.
shift that mentality and that way of being into something different. And I think whilst I had some big wins, like early days, you know, my first launch, I had some really big wins. Like I wasn't really kicking goals in a really stable way until I'd shifted out of that mindset.
Mm.
You know, like it wasn't conducive to the
Yeah.
reality I wanted to create because I was still working, you know.
Yeah. It's one of the things I love so much about you is like that constant, your ability to be able to articulate that constant unraveling. And it does feel like it's like it is when when you were talking about sitting there and you're sitting at your desk 9 to 5. Can you just imagine that little person on the shoulder that's like, you need to do this, you need to do this. And it's like, oh, I'm still answering to someone. So what's the next step that I'm going to take? And the next step and the next step until finally we're not living that boring routine life anymore. And it's all kind of just unraveling. And for me, I feel as though, you know, that aspect was made easier with having children. And because you know, I had to be out and like taking them to places and doing stuff. And so working it around that as well. But even still, there's a massive mindset shift that needs to happen to be able to get to that place.
Totally.
Yeah. So what inspires you most about life? Like you said, how you love going out on the jet ski. What
I
is it
was
that
just,
inspires you?
as soon as you said that, before you even said jet ski, I was like adventure, you know,
Yeah.
experiencing life, having all different types of experiences where I get to really be in my body and be in the human experience. So whether that be on a jet ski or in intimate moments with my partner or like driving my car, you know, like just those simple things really are what bring me a lot of joy. And I feel like in the sort of spiritual kind of coaching growth space, there's a lot of push away of those really human experiences. And my way of living is to like embrace the sacred in every single one of those things and know that they were all created by the same creation that created us. And so they're no better or less than having a cacao ceremony or any of those other types of typically considered more sacred experiences. And I really love to bring that same level of sacredness to the really basic or mundane or 3D aspects of my reality and not bypass them or consider them or push them away in a way that would have them be considered to be less conscious or less spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that so much and agree with it 100%. And for me, you know, not having grown up in that kind of spiritual world, the ceremonial aspect kind of just came accidentally. And the question that came when you were speaking then was, is that because I feel as though everyone has their own interpretation of the beauty way. Is that the beauty way for you of being able to be in the mundane? And
Yeah.
what does it mean for you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My not-for-profit unincorporated foundation is called Sacred Living. And the whole foundation of that and the purpose and the ethos, if you will, is to bring the sacred into the living, like into every single experience. And so the beauty way to me is finding the beauty in every single experience and holding this non-dualistic approach to every single thing where it's all beautiful, where it's all magnificent. And even in the moments of struggle or like difficulty,
Yeah.
yeah, bringing that same level of sacredness to all of those moments.
Mm,
That's what I would consider to be the beauty way for me. Yeah, just finding that like slipstream kind of in between.
mm. So how did you arrive at this place of being able to know that you don't want to live that I'm saying mundane, but we want to bring beauty to the mundane. You don't want to live that routine lifestyle that's been conditioned into us. How did you arrive at this place to go, no, that I'm not going to do that. It's not going to be me anymore?
Yeah, I feel like there's probably a few factors. Firstly, I grew up in a family where my dad had his own business, my mum worked within that business, and together they created a lifestyle where we had kind of everything that we needed as their kids. And then simultaneously we would go camping every school holidays, and we were going like all different types of usually camping, four-wheel driving trips, throughout the year. And we never felt like kind of dad was stuck at work, if you will. And so there was already a sense of like creating my own sort of experience, I guess, from that. And then when I was about 22, I think, I got a job in travel, and I worked in travel for 10 years before I started doing what I do now. That was the first place that I learned and did my first coaching programs and my first coaching courses, because I was a sales coach at that time. And that lifestyle, again, in that industry, it was encouraged to be traveling. It was encouraged to take time and experience the world, because that's what made us good at our job. And so
Yeah.
I was working in a typical kind of job, and yet I would get additional holidays every year because that was classified as educational time. And because we worked on a kind of rotating roster, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, depending on the location that I was working at any one time, it meant that I could kind of work and then bank up my hours and then sort of back to back my hours and then go traveling. And so it meant that, again, I was living in this way that was somewhat typical, but I was sort of bordering or broaching into something beyond that, because, all of my friends that worked in a more structured sort of Monday to Friday role would never be able to come with me. They would
Yeah.
never be able to, like, they would always be like, oh, I wish that I was able to do what you do. And I was still like very much in the structure, just a little bit verging out of it. And so I guess that sparked a desire to just have the level of freedom and not have limitations to when I could take holidays, because we always had blackout periods in May and October, because they were, high season for our sales. And I wanted to not have limits to that. And so, yeah, I feel like that's probably what initially had me kind of find that desire and land in that place.
I love that because I didn't know that about you. So I love that I asked you that question. I didn't know that you were in the travel industry.
I was, yeah.
That's so cool. So one thing dropped out of that was there a moment? Was there like a tipping point where you were like, no, I want more. I want more here.
It's interesting because in the entire 10 years that I was working in that industry, I loved what I did. I
Mm.
absolutely loved it. I loved the industry as a whole. I loved where I worked. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved being able to talk to individuals every single day about what they loved and their, often second biggest purchase after third biggest after a car and a house, but quite often some of them didn't have cars and would never buy a car. And so sometimes the second biggest purchase, and to be able to like be a part of that was just always really warmed my heart. And yet that entire time I knew that that wasn't going to be my forever thing. I
Mm.
knew that that was a step in the journey. And so when there was like a transition moment where I I was getting really interested in health, like really interested. And actually, if I just rewind for a minute, the first day when I was about 25, when they sat me in my first coaching training, I remember the coach at the front of the room teaching us like how to coach and how to facilitate and support our teams to perform and to be the best versions of themselves inside and outside of work. I remember on that day knowing that this was what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I knew that I was going to be a coach. And so for the next kind of 7 years after that, I was able to, you know, it felt so blessed to do that whilst having a job. Like it was part of my job. I got to do, and I knew that at some point in time, it would get to a point where it didn't feel like it was the place to be doing it anymore. And for the last 3 years that I was working there, I dropped all the way back into like very, very part-time. And I decided to study nutrition. And so when I was getting really kind of obsessed with health and really interested in all these aspects. And my mum's a naturopath, and I used to ring her and ask her all these questions about the body. And at some point she just basically said, like, the questions that you're asking are like beyond my scope. Like, I think you just need to go and study nutrition. And so I went and studied nutrition. And again, during that course, I knew that it wasn't going to be my forever thing, but I also knew that I was closer and closer and closer. And when I finished that degree, I moved to London for 2 years. And when I was living there, I knew that when I came back, I wasn't going to do either of those things, and that I was going to start my own business. And so it was sort of progressive. It was sort of woven into everything that I was doing. I wouldn't say that there was one kind of standout moment that had me decide. It was just kind of like layered, like step by step on top of one another. And when I got home from London, I didn't go back to work. And that's when I started my business.
Mm. What I heard there though was an appreciation for the different aspects of our existence. So what you've shared in this, you know, the love of the travel, the love of being in nature with your camping growing up, and then also an interest in health and wanting to help people. To me, they all feel like important elements of us being able to sink into the beauty way. And I feel as though it is important for us to have that understanding of us being as nature, in nature and part of nature, for us to live the beauty way, because she does like weave so beautifully. And that's the other thing I love, is that you said you always knew that this would never be your forever thing. And I think that's it as well. It's like recognizing the transient nature and the temporary nature of things, and releasing attachment of this is the way that it's got to be forever, because this is the way that it is right now.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like it's so important to be willing and open and available for the changes. You know, I've had this conversation quite a few times recently of this concept of never saying never. And it feels like there's so many ways in which that weaves into my existence, because I know with certainty that how I'm feeling right now may be very, very different tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then in a year from now, I know I will be a completely different version of myself. So how could I possibly ever be certain of, you know, and the same is true in the other. Like, I can know that something isn't forever just by knowing that nothing is forever.
Yeah. Yeah, nice.
Mm.
Amazing. Something else that just popped in when you were speaking then. Oh yeah. So when you decided you were like, no, I'm all in. This is my, this is my business. This is what I'm doing. I am no longer answering to anyone. How did you feel? Was that the moment where it was like, was it clear of in that moment, I'm not answering to anyone? Because if we go back to the start, when you said you were still sitting at your desk, and were you aware of the fears that were coming up for you, or were there fears coming up for you in that moment?
Yeah, definitely. I remember, I think probably the biggest moment that made it feel really real at the time was when I had signed up to do my first kind of coaching program with a business coach. And it was about kind of about 5 or 6 months after I got back from London and given it a good hot crack on my own and realized that I really needed some support. And I remember exactly where I was sitting, exactly what I was doing in the moment, where I had like a consultation call with one of her team, and it was about like me signing signing up to do the program. And at the time it was $6,000, which was $6,000 more than I had. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I have to. And it was like this by me handing over my credit card in that moment, that's when I was like fully committing. Because before that, there was still, I could always go back to my old job. They would have me in a heartbeat, like, and whilst that was there, that was definitely a safety net. I never had to lean on, but it was there. And that kind of supported me in the safety throughout that whole thing. Because whilst I had fears, I knew that there was something to support me. And that's actually another aspect of the journey that I feel like is really important. I did everything that I could to support myself in all the fears. And one of those pieces was I knew that starting my own business and without a lot of capital, because I had just spent everything that I had traveling and living in London, I knew that if I was going to do this, I wanted to support myself. And whilst I probably didn't have this language then around like how I needed to support my nervous system, so I wouldn't go into a full freeze and literally do nothing. That's ultimately what I was doing. I actually moved in with my mum for a period of time, and I said to her, like, I want to start my business. I don't know how long it's going to take. Will you have me? And she said yes. And so I couldn't have done it without like my job on the side, had that not have been available to me. And this is something that I notice with people all the time. There tends to be a lot of shame around having like both, like having some sort of like really living with one foot in each world. And
Yes.
I was lucky enough that I could just kind of go full steam and have those days where I was crippled in my own fear and what have you, and it not mean that I couldn't pay my rent or eat that week. Like I was fully supported. And so I really get that that's a challenge for people. And I had equally as much shame around the fact that I was living with my mom at 30, however many years old I was, as what I probably would have had if I had a job. And so neither is in my experience, it wasn't any less shameful. And yet I had to go through a lot to unravel and pick apart that shame and actually come into a place of deep honor and gratitude of the privilege and the support that I have in my reality to have been able to do that. Because I know I've worked with hundreds of coaches and healers that have built their own businesses, and most of them didn't have that. And so I can't even remember what your first question was.
No, and it's so beautiful because when you talked about moving in with your mum, that's what I thought is like there's so much stigma around that in our society. And for you to do that took real courage. And I can understand that there would have been shame and guilt and all of the things associated with that. But it takes courage to do something like that and fully commit. And I felt like when you said that little piece, you moved in with your mum, then there's a commitment there to this is what I'm doing, and allowing ourselves to move through that. And everyone's got their own, obviously we've all got our own patterns, but that's really beautiful that that you were able to do that, and also to receive the support. Like that's conversations that I've had a lot of times as well, is people feel ashamed for receiving support from their loved ones, for receiving money like a loan or living with them or whatever. When actually, if we move into gratitude, we actually can allow ourselves to receive more and more, because we've got that sense of gratitude for what we've actually chosen to do. And we can get there, we can get into that bending time and moving things along faster for ourselves.
100%. And, when it comes to building a business, receiving money, building our abundance, like if I hadn't have built myself into the space of gratitude and appreciation for that experience, like that's just a self-limitation of my own abundance. That was a creation that was just as magical as manifesting a dream house. Like there's so many, and yet we can have judgments on one over the other, and one is better than the other. And I remember I heard you tell me once, or tell us once, when I was in a space with you, about how you'd shared this story around, I think you were telling your daughter that, you know, her manifesting $50 from her parents was still her manifesting $50. And I could totally resonate with that, because that had been, you know, I've been very privileged in my life to have been able to receive that level of support from my family. And it wasn't until probably 2019 when I really started doing abundance work that I really got to sit and actually realize that, like really let it settle in, that those pieces of support, like I'm so abundant to have been able to receive them, you know, and to actually receive them, like not just allow it to happen and be like, oh, I'm going to make do with this, but actually like let it into my heart and be like, woof, the gratitude of
Yeah.
the existence and how it shows up for me. You know, it was a really pivotal moment in my own abundance, like being, you know, in the space in which I exist from.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it does, it really opens the heart. And when we sit in that space of gratitude, we give that person who, you know, whether it's our mum, whether it's our children or whatever, we give them the ability to be able to feel what they've actually just given us as well. So yeah, how beautiful that you're, you know, you and your mum were able to take that journey together and she was able to help you make that transition. And that then moves me into the next question that I had was, if you had one piece of advice to give your 18-year-old self, because my daughter just turned 18 yesterday, so
Yeah.
I've been really reflecting on this lately. What would it be? What would that one piece of wisdom be for her in this moment?
You're always making the right decision.
Mm.
Because when I was 18, I came from a fairly, like, I wouldn't say prestigious, but a really good, like, private school. And everyone around me was going to study this and that, and, you know, all these things. And thank God that I had the parents that I have that said, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't feel confident with any avenue that I was going to take if I was going to study. And I wanted to just go and work. And I feel really blessed to say that my parents encouraged me to and said, don't choose anything until you feel like you really pulled towards it. And I didn't. And I felt really a lot of struggle with that decision, even though there was a part of me that really wanted to. The 18-year-old part of me that was still such a baby, like, didn't feel confident that I was making the right decision. I was like, am I going to throw my life away because I'm not going to go and study? Like, these are the things that were happening at that time. And, you know, what ended up happening was I went and I traveled the world and I worked in travel and I did all these amazing things. And then I actually felt so heart-led to go and study nutrition. And I didn't do that until I was 27, you know, and so every single decision that I've made from then until now has been the right decision in that moment, and irrespective of which option I chose. And that's totally what I would tell her. I would really support her to anchor in, to trust herself even more so that she
Mm.
didn't have to worry about the decisions that she was making.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I love that you started to study nutrition at 27 after taking that path. My path was a little bit different. I I took a year off, but I had a job after school as well. But then I joined the army, but I was always attracted to the health as well. You know, I was going to go and study health at university, and instead I joined the army. You know, that was my tangent. But which was great. You know, it brought a lot of wisdom to my life. And yeah, but then I always came back to it because it was what lit me up. And so I made the right decisions for myself at the time to actually receive what I needed. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And the last question that I have for you is, if somebody was asking you about how they could live and weave more of the beauty way into their life,
Mm.
what would you share with them as a way to just start?
Yeah. I feel like the way to start is to begin to find appreciation for ideally everything, but as many things as possible, you know, in your day. And I was literally just talking about this morning, that one of the most impactful things that I ever did for my like abundance mindset or my self-love was to this practice, rewinding back to that course that I did for $6,000 way back when. It was a 4-month program, and during that program, one of the tasks that we were given was that every single day for that entire 4 months, we were to write down 5 things that we were grateful for and 5 things that we acknowledge about ourselves. And the things that we acknowledge about ourselves could be anything from, like, I really acknowledge that I got up today, even though I didn't want to. You know, I acknowledge that I had a shower, even though I have kids running around. I acknowledge that I fed myself with nourishing food. You know, whatever it was, it could also be I kicked out of the park so many awesome tasks today and I nailed it in my business or whatever. But what it did was it completely rewired the way in which I see my reality, because those 5 things wired my brain to constantly look for what I was doing instead of what I wasn't doing. The 5 gratitude pieces had me constantly looking for 5 things to write on that list every day. And so I had to like consciously build this muscle. And again, didn't have the language now have the language to understand. I was building new neural pathways to look for and create an automatic habit of looking for the things that I have appreciation for. And then that just builds more appreciation. And for me, the beauty way, the more we can consciously be in that appreciation as much as we can, the more beauty there is to see, the more beauty there is to experience, because we're wired to look for it instead of it passing us by. I was thinking this just when we were talking before about every day. So I live really close to the bay in Melbourne, Port Phillip Bay, and I live down the peninsula, and it's absolutely stunning. And most days of the week, I drive about 20 minutes to a Pilates class. And it is part of my daily practice to drive home the beach way. So on the Esplanade and down onto the Nepean Highway along the beach, for the purpose of being in the appreciation of where I live. And so even though it takes 5 extra minutes to drive home and I will have clients, and I've literally created my schedule to include that time. And it's so funny because I'd been away for 6 weeks just recently, and then I got home and I've kind of just refinding my routines and things. And one of the first times I went back to Pilates last week or the week before, I found myself driving home a different way. And I was like, what the hell am I doing? I'm not at the beach. What's going on? You know, but that like, and then I ended up turning off early so I could go to the beach, but just I missed some of it. And it's such a conscious thing that I choose to do every day to bring more of that appreciation and beauty into my day, because it's so easy to get in the warp of time stress and get home 5 minutes earlier and go the back way, which is ultimately on the highway, which, you know, has its own beautiful pieces. And, you know, there's the bay. I drive there that way, so I get to drive home the other way. Yeah.
Totally. So scheduling the beauty, basically.
Yeah, like making time for it, making conscious action towards creating it.
And I love that, because one of the things that I also talk about is, you know, when I started to learn about this creating my reality, it was in 2010, I remember, and I didn't really know what I wanted to create, and I didn't know because I'd lived this life that was you know, part of the army for so long. And then all of a sudden I was being told I could create my reality. And so what I decided was that I just want to focus on seeing green and blue every day. And because to me that represented being in nature. And so as I allowed myself to just focus on green and blue every day, within a couple of years, that was what I was seeing mostly during the
Yeah,
day, was green and blue. And that's how it works, is that we literally reprogram our minds. And when you were speaking as well, the thing that came is, it does take commitment, doesn't it? It takes commitment to actually focus on those beautiful things instead of the things that we don't want. But we're so worth it. And we deserve to commit to that, because I deserve to take that extra 5 minutes to walk along, to drive along the beach if I don't have the time to walk, to drive along the beach, just so that I can experience that in my day and remember the beauty of what it is to be a human being.
totally. Totally. I mean, everything in the typical 3D reality is programming us to do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Look at the news,
Yes.
look at the things that are focused on, and it gives us the reason it takes commitment is because we have to shift into something different to that in order for it to be created. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it takes action just as much as it takes on the enjoyment and the experience, is that it takes the action to create it. Mm.
Absolutely. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today, honey. And is there anything else that you want to share with my friends who are watching this podcast?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was just that blessed you are to be friends with Kirsty.
Oh, yes.
So thank
Uh,
you. Thank you for having me today here. And I'm really excited that I'm the first. And I'm also really excited to receive all of the ones that you create from here moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited about it as well. And again, us coming together is part of the beauty way, and us being able just to share and to be friends and to have this connection virtually is part of the beauty way, because the more that we allow ourselves to do that, and the more that we speak about this kind of stuff, that's the ripple effect that's moving out into the world. So yeah, I'm so grateful for all of my beautiful friends that have said yes, that will continue to say yes and talk about beautiful things with me.
Yay. Thanks, Beck. Appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Mm.